In my professional opinion, this guy's deader than shit.
These videos are not for children. If you're a children, then piss off.
Hey there, it's me, your least favorite YouTuber, Infuso. And you may not know this about me, but I'm a bit of a horror movie fan. And the first horror series I ever got involved with was Friday the 13th. The first scary movie I ever seen was Freddy vs. Jason, back when it first came out in movie theaters. And that's why today I'm gonna celebrate my love of this series by talking about where it all went wrong. This is the day Friday the 13th died. Now, that's a lot easier said than done, because in many ways, Jason is symbolic of the series itself, constantly seemingly dying for good only to inevitably be resurrected once more. It's really hard for me to pinpoint where exactly the franchise went off the rails, because I think a lot of that's left up to a matter of personal taste and preference, and I think that's probably different for almost everybody. So let me ask, when did this franchise become unrecognizable? There certainly was a formula that the original films created. Slasher in the Woods takes the lives of teenage and young adult camp workers. That simple synopsis was pretty much the plot of part 1 through 5. The only thing that changed throughout was the killer. While Jason is undoubtedly the masked mascot and hidden face of the franchise, it wasn't always that way. With his mother Pamela Voorhees being revealed to be the killer in the first film, taking revenge on those who worked at the camp in the name of her dead son, blaming them for their predecessor's neglect as they allowed Jason to drown. Only for the end of that movie to then reveal that Jason was in fact still alive. And following his mother's death, he would take over the killer mantle. Jason would continue her wrath and wreak havoc on those who came to the campgrounds up until the 5th installment. At which point, a Jason copycat named Roy takes over the mantle and kills to avenge his dead son. So right off the bat, it's clear that this series was never set in stone. They couldn't even figure out who the main character was for quite some time. And other characters kind of have that same fate. Tommy Jarvis is introduced in what's supposed to be the final Friday, only for both he and the franchise to return in the next 2 installments, with Tommy being recast each movie, kind of becoming a mainstay in these films. You know, Tommy was kind of an important figure here. He was the only recurring character in the whole canon outside of Jason and his mother, and just like that, he's forever forgotten. Later in his place, they kind of set up the character of Creighton Duke. You know, he takes on the role of guy who knows stuff. And boy, does this guy know a whole lot. He has information on Jason that no one else does. He knows things that the audience attending these movies didn't even know about Jason at the time. Never explained how he has that information or why he has that information. We just know that he has a long history with Jason that's only alluded to in passing. It's never seen, explained, or explored. It's just something to bring him into the movie. So as you can already tell, the continuity is kind of a mess. Mainly because this is a series that didn't have the next installment in mind when making any of the movies. When viewed as a franchise, there's an obvious indecisiveness that comes with each new entry. Having Jason decisively killed several times over at the end of each one of these movies shows that the brand was trying to get away from itself. They made each one of these movies almost as if they were expecting each one of these movies to be the last one of these movies. After a certain point in time, they really should have known. This leads to a lot of continuity errors and unanswered questions. But then again, I don't think that most people went into these movies expecting well thought out, intricate lore. Although I will say, to the franchise's credit, they did usually find a way to tell you a little bit more about Jason as time went on. But that's also kind of a problem, because these movies, which are supposed to be linked, wouldn't feel any more dismembered if they were one of Jason's victims. In part 1, we're told Jason is long dead. His childhood was tragically cut short. But then in part 2, he's back as an adult man. There's never an official explanation for that either. We're never for sure told how Jason returned. Some continuities, including the comics, have retconned this as him being brought back from the dead using the Necronomicon. Yeah, the Book of the Dead from the Evil Dead franchise. That very one. But there's never any concrete explanation given within the films themselves. That's kind of an important plot point. You think they might have mentioned it in passing somewhere along the way. And even with this explanation, there are some problems there. Like, let's say this is the case, and Jason is in fact a deadite. Why is Jason a grown-ass dead man? He died a child and was brought back as an adult? How does that make sense? Like, even if I'm trying to understand your mystic bullshit, that is just beyond comprehension. That's just too dumb. Unless you're telling me this man had some kind of afterlife growth spurt that I didn't know could exist. So Jason's a zombie, is basically what you're telling me. Jason is now and has always been a zombie. Which is weird because he officially dies in part 4 the way a man would, but then he's resurrected as a very clear zombified version of himself in part 6.
You can't make me die more.
So even if he wasn't the living dead before, he's definitely one now. Okay, alright, so Jason is a zombie. You would think. Because later it's stated in Jason Goes to Hell that Jason is not man nor dead man. He's actually a demonic slug that crawls into unsuspecting victims hoping to find a new host. Oh, and he always has been. Jason is a sinister snail sans shell. And that factoid is never mentioned before, nor after this movie. This movie really had the nerve to come out here and say, Jason is a slug. Accept it. I mean, sure, yeah, why not? It makes about as much sense as Sweet Tooth being a caterpillar, so why not? You know what? Yeah, sure. Honestly, it's not just that this is stupid. It is. It is very stupid. It is one of the dumbest things I think not only has ever been done to this horror franchise, but in a horror franchise overall. But it's not just that it's unfathomably dumb. It's also the concept that Jason has always been a slug. How does that make sense with everything we've seen thus far with the character? The answer is, it doesn't. I mean, this seems like an integral portion of Jason's backstory. I've been following this man around thinking that he was some kind of a zombie brought back from the dead twice over, who just had an affinity for machetes. But now you're actually telling me that he's just a miniature Jabba the Hutt looking motherfucker. I don't even know what to do with that information. I wish you hadn't given it to me. Let the record show that I was significantly happier in life before I learned that Jason Voorhees was a land sea slug. It's also in that same movie that we learned that Jason has a never-before-seen or heard-about sister. Oh, good. It only took you 9 movies to mention her. But then again, I didn't even know that the guy was an insect from hell, so I clearly don't know shit about the franchise. 9 movies in, they introduce his sister and have him go after her. Have you not stolen enough from the Halloween franchise? Do we really need to go all out and turn Jason Voorhees into Michael Myers? I don't think so. It's excessive at this point. I mean, what are you going to do next? You going to put him in the same janitor? Oh my god, you did that. Okay. Yep. That makes sense. I'm mad. And don't you even get me started with the final film in this lineup not just suggesting, but emphasizing that Jason has a fear of water. Jason Voorhees, is afraid of water. If I had all day, which I do not, if I had all day to tell you how wildly dumb and out of character that is, it would still not be enough time. That would be an interesting plot point. Seeing as Jason drowns as a child, there could be some validity to this development. You know, this could play into a narrative and it would make sense. Storytelling-wise, it would stand to reason that he would have some fear of water. Unfortunately, what contradicts that is nearly every other movie that came out before this one having Jason lurk and stalk his prey in water. Having zero issue with entering water. Spending a vast amount of time in water. If he's afraid of water, why does he live at Camp Crystal Lake? It would be counterproductive to what he's trying to accomplish. How could the guy who comes out of water fear water itself? Okay, you know what? I need a break. Listen, you can say all that you want about Friday the 13th, but I have to hand it to the schlocky slasher series. It was always taking risks. For a horror franchise that is often credited as making the same movie several times over, the latter half of this set of films completely disproves that statement. Having Jason go toe-to-toe with a discount Carrie? Trying to fight off telekinesis? Bringing Jason out to the big city? Turning Jason into a worm creature? Sending him to space? That is a thing that happened? They did that? They really did that? Or even having him battle Freddy Krueger? Friday wasn't afraid to go against its own blueprint. It took risks. Unfortunately, not all of them were well calculated. But I still respect them for daring to do something new. I think a lot of these decisions, though, alienated the core audience away from the brand because they wanted to see more of the same done differently, rather than something completely different entirely. I think most people would say the series died a death the day it was taken over by New Line Cinema. And I can understand that way of thinking. There's some validity to that school of thought, as New Line Cinema acquired the character, but not the franchise name. They ordered just Jason, hold the Friday the 13th, meaning that the next line of films were labeled as Jason movies. Quite literally, the move to New Line was the death of Friday the 13th. And even outside the name itself, these movies weren't nearly as iconic as the original few were. Of course, that's hard success to replicate, but, maybe at least try. But I would also like to remind you that the last entry before Paramount sold the rights over was Jason Takes a Boat Ride. So, they weren't exactly getting a flourishing brand when they got it. But I will admit, under New Line Cinema, some of the weakest entries in the series came out. And it's also where most of the issues I've listed up until now came from. The next few entries feel like fundamental misunderstandings of the character, which is wild to me because even the original series felt a little unsure of what it was they were doing from time to time. But New Line? They mostly stayed consistent. They didn't know what they were doing all of the time. But what's really confusing to me is that Jason isn't some deep and complex character. Making a Friday the 13th film wouldn't require you to be some aficionado on pissed off goalies. It almost felt like they went to great efforts to misinterpret what little lore there was. It's like Jason went to hell and took the whole franchise with him. I'm sure others would point to a little bit earlier as a true decline, but for me, Jason Goes to Hell is around the point where I stop enjoying myself. I mean, I do resume enjoying myself after that movie, just, not nearly as much as I had before. I loathe Jason Goes to Hell. And while I like Jason X, I do find it to be inconsistent with the tone and direction of everything that came before it. Now don't get me wrong, I will watch Jason X any day of the week. It's highly entertaining seeing Jason infiltrate this Star Trek Voyager Deep Space Nine bullshit. But it feels like a fever dream, and I actively have to convince myself all these years later that that is actually something that happened. It's fun, but it doesn't really fit the narrative. It feels more like a parody of a Jason movie than it does an actual Jason movie. And as a parody, I enjoy it. But the fact that this movie is an eventual follow-up to the original Friday the 13th films is absolute insanity. Freddy vs. Jason definitely stands out as the highlight of the character's time with the studio. It was awesome for the time, and is even kind of awesome now. And similar to Jason X, I've had to convince myself that this was really real as well. But for different reasons. This beating of the minds came before there were any cinematic universes. So this battle was almost never considered a possibility before this. While it's still really cool that it happened, and while this movie does have its moments of occasional greatness, it's pretty watered down from what fans had hoped for. And despite being rated R, it still comes off as very PG-13. Most fans that I know agree that this Fight of Frights was a fitting goodbye to both characters. In concept. And in execution, it left a little bit to be desired. But for me personally, I think almost every installment in the franchise is worth watching. There are some that I'm not super keen on, but there are only 1 or 2 movies in this 12-movie lineup that I find to be awful or unwatchable. I think for the most part, each Friday offers up something new, while also delivering the same thing that made the last installment that came before it work. It's seen more success than failure, which is probably why there's now rumors of a reboot. Not that that's really a surprise. As any Friday the 13th fan would tell you, Jason always comes back. So if you like this video, and would maybe be interested in hearing me go through each of these films individually, let me know in the comment section below by leaving a comment saying, Jason, 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 Jason. With all that being said, I was your least favorite YouTuber, Infuso, and I thank you for watching. Hope to see you in the next one.
I am vengeance. I am the night, and that was V Infuso. Just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out.
So, if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too would like to become a V-generate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, nerds!
And if you're not joining the fun, you're in for one bad day. And you know what they say about having one bad day?
Catch Catch him next time. Same bat time. Same bat channel.